Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. I've branded myself. I hope you all enjoy it. I know this isn't as much fun as the cavalcade of shirts I've been wearing in the previous videos that some of you have mentioned. Many thanks for noticing, but we'll always bring those out whenever this is in the laundry. In any case, I now have a costume or a wardrobe that I can wear and display my website, which I hope you'll all visit. Today, though, I want to talk about Das Lied von der Erde, what many consider to be Mahler's masterpiece. Now, this work has been recorded numerous times. I mean, there are too many recordings to discuss them all. I've pulled out about 14, and I may mention some others on top of it. So there's no shortage of choice. And what's more, there seems to be the Das Lied von der Erde club of performers, conductors who've done them more than once, like Bernstein and Bruno Valter, and also singers who appear somewhat incestuously on different versions. There's Christina Ludwig, there's René Collo, there's Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, there's Janet Baker. So we're spoiled for choice. And I'm going to take you through the pluses and minuses of a lot of the different versions. I do want to talk a little bit about some textual issues with the work. You know, Mahler never heard it. And because he died without hearing it, Bruno Valter conducted the premiere and probably oversaw it as well through publication. And as a result of that, the piece has some impracticalities that Mahler might have done something about had he lived. For example, the third trumpet only plays in the first movement and then sits out the rest of the piece. Timpani only play in the fourth movement and then sit out the rest of the piece. These are things that Mahler might or might not have done. But one thing always drove me crazy, and that's in the fourth movement, von der Schönheit, of beauty, in that big central eruption that sounds sort of like the 1812 overture, you know, boom, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, bum, 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 ba, you know, that thing. I could never figure out what the percussion was supposed to do. Now, Bruno Valter, in his recordings, has, to introduce that passage, a snare drum roll with suspended cymbals, then the bass drum comes in. The critical edition has a bass drum roll and then suspended cymbals with no snare drum whatsoever. It's entirely possible that Bruno Valter amended the parts, as he did in some bits of the Ninth Symphony when the work went to publication. I don't know for sure. I did get very curious, and so I went to the Morgan Library in New York, which has the manuscripts of Das Lied von der Erde, just to see what Mahler actually wrote, or at least what was in the copyists' manuscripts for what Mahler actually wrote. And it turns out, and this really fascinated me, that everyone's got it wrong, including the critical editions. The Stichvorlage, that is the publisher's copy, and what I can see from Mahler's manuscript, have triangle, which nobody uses, followed by suspended cymbal. So it should be ring, swoosh, like that, which I actually think is much more in keeping with that sort of brittle, fairy-like, character of the music, the artificiality, the brightness, the Chinese quality. All of these things, Mahler was so sensitive to those things, and it would have been wonderful for someone to play it the way it was actually written down. You can see it yourself. It's there in the Morgan Library, and I actually took copies of it, and I gave them to Charles Mackerras when I saw him in New York, and he conducted it that way in a performance that he gave in Edinburgh. And then I actually sent the same information to Henri-Louis de Lagrange and his assistant, the conductor Sybil Warner, who was very capable and dedicated Mahlerian. And in the appendix, in one of his Mahler biographies, talking about the work and the scoring, they do mention this and very graciously give me credit for pointing it out. So there is that little error of beauty, which maybe someone will fix. It's not a big deal. The other thing about Das Lied von der Erde, percussively anyway, is the tam-tam in Der Abschied. This, by the way, is my Das Lied von der Erde tam-tam. What you need is a large instrument with a dark tone, but one that speaks quickly so that you can follow the music without having to stop it before you get the full texture. Here, listen to that. Get the idea? You know, I mean, it really, the color of the tam-tam really is the signal color in all of Abschied, the last song. Or it ought to be. It isn't always, because some performances don't have an instrument that does what it's supposed to do. But there are moments where all you have is a double bass and a cello on the bottom line and the soloist singing and a tam-tam, and that's it. It's a solo part. And so you really need an instrument that's worthy of it. And unfortunately, so many conductors and performers, they don't bother. They don't care. And the result is so ineffectual and annoying. So we'll get to that too in a moment. So now let's talk about performances. As you know, the first recording was a Bruno Valter Vienna recording in mono with Kirsten Thorborg and whoever else the other guy was. I don't even remember. I've heard it a million times. I don't care. Oh, Charles Coleman, sorry. It's not very good. The sound is very limited. It's not terrible, but you can't pretend that it hasn't been played and sung and recorded better since. So while that recording may have some historical interest, I don't think it's relevant for our consideration here. Others may disagree. I know there are people who just drool over historical recordings. I don't care. I just want the best recordings. I don't care how historical it is. A historical object is just that. It's a historical object. It's not something that I feel I need to take out when I want to be pleased and listen to the work. So that's that one. And then we have to talk about Leonard Bernstein, because he did it twice. And the two times he did it, let's get it straight. Start with number 2 first. This was with the Israel Philharmonic. This was a dry as dust recording. It's been remastered. It sounds somewhat better. It has Christina Ludwig. Oh, this is Des Knaben von der Horn. And René Colo singing. And they're very good. The singing's fine. The orchestra's fine. The sonics are just really, really average. It's one of those live recordings. It's been made to sound somewhat better. Not a bad performance. Not one of Bernstein's greatest, however, despite the excellent soloists. Next, he did this one with James King, who's one of the Das Lied people. He'll pop up again, and Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. Now, I have to say, in all honesty, I think this is a great recording of Das Lied von der Erde, and one of the 2 best if you want to have a baritone soloist, which Mahler indicates is an option. I really, really think it sounds better with an alto. I think the alternation of male and female voices gives the piece so much more color, so much more contrast. I mean, even leaving out the philosophical question of whether you want to have an Earth Mother type voice or whatever. I don't care about that. I just care about the timbres and the musicality of the thing. But this is a great performance. But so is Paul Kletsky's with Murray Dickey and Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau in younger and even fresher voice than he is for Leonard Bernstein. And he shouts less. I mean, he actually sings the music a little bit better. So Kletsky's a version worth considering. It's a superb recording. Now we're going to talk about a whole stack of others. We'll do more Bruno Valters in a minute, too. And some of these will be quite surprising. Carlo Maria Giulini. This was one of his late recordings. It's with the Berlin Philharmonic. Francisco Ariza is very, very good in the tenor songs, surprisingly so, because as you know, he has a somewhat light voice. He's a Rossini tenor, that sort of stuff. But he sings very well, and the mics help him, so it's okay. Birgitta Fassbender has all of the intensity and feeling for the music, but her voice is a little wobbly. Let's not kid ourselves, And Giulini does some sort of interesting things, conducting-wise. I mean, he's got the Berlin Philharmonic playing very, very well, but something strange happens in Der Abschied with the piccolo in the second part. And at the very end, Mahler writes, that die Liebe Erde allüberall blüht auf im Lenz, that whole thing. Mahler says that the whole thing should be triple piano, which everybody ignores because no singer is going to sing it that way, and that it's supposed to be conducted one in a bar, which would make it rather quick. Giulini tries it. He tries to do it. Does it really work? I don't think so. But you can see for yourself if you think it works. I think it needs to be a little slower. But, it's what Mahler wrote. Again, had he survived, had he been alive to do it, would he have changed it? We don't know. All we know is that no one pays attention to what Mahler wrote there, and they're right not to. in my view. Next, and this is a big surprise, Sanaa Polly with the Staatskapelle Dresden. The singers are, let's see, Iris Vermillion and Keith Lewis. Now, Sanaa Polly was a very erratic Mahler conductor. I mean, he was kind of erratic generally, but his Mahler, especially with the Philharmonia, is dark and slow and decadent and sort of indifferently played. Well, here everything came together. This is the best of his Mahler, in my opinion. It really is. Beautifully recorded. You have the Staatskapelle Dresden, who's wonderful. The singers are in very, very good shape. The tempos make sense. And I think also, as is so often the case, you're better off when the conductor is functioning as an accompanist. He has less opportunity to engage in narcissistic navel-gazing than when he has to pay attention to what his singers have to do, like breathe and sing. Anyway, this is an excellent Das Lied, one that usually gets overlooked in the Das Lied sweepstakes. Another overlooked and excellent version is Eugene Ormandy. I know you're going to go, oh God, Ormandy's boring, he's this. No, not at all. This is a superbly played, beautifully recorded performance with Lily Chukasian, a contralto who nobody ever had anything good to say about. Not that she was bad, but she was a concert artist, basically, with a somewhat average voice, but she never did better work than she did here. And tenor Richard Lewis, who's another Das Lied guy who we will come across again. But really a very, very fine performance, completely respectable. And I mean, Ormandy doesn't put a foot wrong anywhere, and he's got a great orchestra playing beautifully. You also have to remember, Ormandy, and he was proud of this fact, was considered the greatest accompanist of his day. Certainly as a concerto accompanist, and those same qualities apply when considering his accompanying of singers, of vocalists. He's as considerate as anyone ever could be without compromising the music's own, color and expressivity. So that's worth considering. Now here is a real shocker when it came out. A.G. Owe with the Minnesota Orchestra, right? Yes, with Michelle de Jong, who's a Mahler specialist. She became a Mahler specialist. And tenor John Villers. This is a really, really well-played, well-sung recording. And the engineering, it's reference recordings, guys. You're never going to hear the engineering better done than you do on this recording. It's definitely worth listening to. And I find that, Owe could be somewhat cool and uninteresting. He really seems to be into the piece. It's a very, very detailed, expressive, beautifully shaped, wonderfully paced performance. So this is, if you are an audiophile and want a great Das Lied von der Erde, this is your baby. Definitely give it a shot. Now, this is the Das Lied Remastering Award. Reiner with Maureen Forrester, also a Mahler specialist, but a wonderful, wonderful contralto, an intelligent, fine singer who, again, is at her very, very best on this record. And this is also, isn't this? Yes, Richard Lewis, our good friend, Richard Lewis. Here he is again. And, Reiner, it's Reiner. The playing's going to be fabulous. But this was always such a dull-sounding recording when it was out on just sort of regular budget or cheapy RCA. It sounded so mediocre. And that made the whole performance sound boring because Reiner was a colorist. And if the orchestration, if the sound wasn't great, then Reiner wasn't great. I mean, it's really that simple. You have to be able to hear what he makes the orchestra do. And in this living stereo remastering, the whole performance comes alive. It's just transformed into this vivid, beautiful performance. Again, the pacing is terrific, but you can really enjoy now the singing and the playing as never before. I think it's a recording. It's got to be one of the 2 or 3 most underrated versions out there. And it's definitely worth hearing now. Then there's the live Das Lied shocker, Raphael Kubla, who never made a studio recording. This one's with Janet Baker, who sounds even better than she does on the Haitink recording, which is we're going to come to, and Valdemar Kment, tenor, who's also just dramatic and dynamic and terrific. In his live concerts, Kubla could let things sort of go astray at times. He was not a conductor given to perfection of execution. That wasn't what he was after. But in this Das Lied von der Erde, the Bavarian forces play fabulously. They don't put an instrument wrong. Kubla is in tip-top shape. He has the entire work in his hands, and the singing is just spectacular. And so is the sound, by the way. This was from about 1970, and the engineering is as good as you will get in Das Lied von der Erde. So if you're looking for a great live Das Lied where the audience isn't too irritating and the singing is astonishing, and I wish I could have been there. It's a great performance by a great Mahler conductor. That's on Audite, if it's still available. You never know these days. Now we have to talk about Bruno Valter. Get ready. Here we go. This is the part where I need to duck before somebody tries to shoot me or something. Okay. Vienna Philharmonic, mono, Kathleen Ferrier, and was it Julius Patzak? Yeah, Julius Patzak. Okay. Here we are. Both singers past their primes. I don't think either of them sound very well. Vienna Philharmonic, post-war Vienna Philharmonic, mono, they weren't in the best shape either. Valter, he's a little bit edgy, a little too fast in Abschied. This is not a great Das Lied von der Erde. Now, I know that the English critics swoon over Kathleen Ferrier. Her life was tragic. She was a moving and intensely involved singer. But this is not great singing. And if you can divorce yourself from sentimental attachment to the autobiographical story that you hear tirelessly, yes, she died young of cancer and Bruno Valter was in love with her. I got news for you. Bruno Valter was in love with whatever singer he was working with at the time. He was just as in love with Mildred Miller, who we'll get to in a minute. So, all of these extra musical tidbits are completely irrelevant to the sound of the performance. And the sound of this performance is not great. Now, that's me. You may have a different opinion, but I'm right. Okay. Next, Bruno Valter again. This is his great Das Lied von der Erde. It's with Ernst Haefliger, who is a great singer, who also recorded this a couple times with Joachim, which was actually quite good also, and with Mildred Miller. Now, Mildred Miller is another one of those contraltos about which nobody has anything good to say. She was a fine singer. Bruno Valter loved her in this. They did the entire Abschied in one take. They couldn't improve on it. The playing is magnificent. The stereo sound is terrific. It's absolutely glorious. And if you want to hear Bruno Valter at his very best in Das Lied von der Erde, then this is the one you need to own. Plain and simple. It's a great performance. I return to it very, very frequently, and each time I hear it, I am even more impressed by just how idiomatic and natural and right it sounds, and how good the singing really is. But of course, for singing, you gotta have this one, Klemperer, with the young Christina Ludwig in spectacular voice, and Fritz Wunderlich, the greatest tenor who ever sang the tenor songs. This is another magnificent performance. Klemperer in top form. The only thing it's missing is a great tam-tam and Abschied. I don't know why. The Philharmonia had a great tam-tam, but for some reason it doesn't come out quite the way it should, and Klemperer doesn't seem to care terribly. He likes winds. It should sound. Remember that? Well, that's not what you hear here, but it's okay. This is such a great performance in all other respects, and the singing is extraordinary. It's the singer's performance. It still sounds great. I can't praise it enough. It's another one that you reach for when you want to hear Das Lied von der Erde. It's that simple. So what can I say? But the interesting thing, of course, is that Christina Ludwig, who also, re-recorded the thing for Bernstein on his video with the Israel Philharmonic, and did it for Karajan. This is a dud. This is Karajan and René Colo. Now, first of all, there's no tam tam and Abschied at all at the beginning. It sort of comes and goes later a little bit, but this is one of those Karajan performances that it's weird. His textural preferences, he doesn't give there's no substance to the orchestral sound. It's very refined, almost anorexic the way that it sounds. It's the only way I can describe it. It sounds like it has an eating disorder. And so I don't recommend the Karajan. Some people may like it because, again, the singing's good, but it's not Das Lied von der Erde. It doesn't come close to realizing all of the coloristic variety that Mahler wrote into the piece. And I also want to point out there are other good performances that I'm not going to talk about too much. Tenstedt's is very good. Scholti's with Ivan Mitten and also René Colo is surprisingly good and also gets very, very little attention. It's beautifully done. But if I had to pick one, Haitink with Janet Baker and James King. Now, Baker doesn't sound quite as good as she did earlier on for Kubelik. James King was sort of approaching the end of his career, which is when tenors tend to do these songs, because if they scream their lungs out, it's like they're going to retire anyway soon, so it doesn't matter. I mean, the writing is so ungrateful. You could tell that Mahler just hated tenors. But this, in its combination of great singing, great playing, great sonics, great conducting by a true Mahler conductor, is just about impossible to beat. I don't think I've ever heard a more beautiful, truer, more expressively on point rendition of the work than this magnificent recording from Bernhard Haitink with the Concertgebouw Orchestra. So if you gotta hear Das Lied and you don't have room in your budget for 14 or 15 versions, then this is the one to get. Haitink, Baker, King, Concertgebouw. It's Das Lied von der Erde heaven. So thank you all and keep on listening.